Look at those ugly scars, princess. What happened? Did you fall down some stairs? Private Jake Morrison's cruel laughter echoed across the training field as he filmed Sergeant Maya Stanley with his phone, mocking every mark on her scarred arms. She stood silent, motionless, saying nothing while he humiliated her in front of the entire squad. But her silence wasn't weakness. It was something far more dangerous. When General Victor Sterling appeared on the scene, his face went pale with rage. The words that followed made hardened soldiers drop to their knees. Some even dropped their phones in shock. What call sign could terrify an entire army base and become legend in whispered stories around family dinners? Comment below. Who do you think she really is? Nice bruises, princess? Didn't know Fort Blackwater had spa days. Jake's voice sliced through the early morning haze like a dull blade cutting through the humid Tennessee air. He smirked as he stepped back into line, his voice pitched just loud enough to ensure every soldier within 50 yards could hear his mockery. That was the point, after all. Public humiliation always hit harder than private insults, and Jake Morrison had built his reputation on knowing exactly where to strike for maximum damage. Sergeant Maya Stanley stood alone on the open training field, her olive-green tank top soaked with sweat despite the early hour. Dust clung to her bronze skin like a second uniform that refused to come clean. The morning sun caught the evidence of her recent struggles, bruises blooming across her arms in shades of purple and yellow, spreading down her collarbone like twisted artwork painted in pain. These weren't the kind of marks that came from one bad day or a single accident. These were the kind you earned slowly, the kind that lingered and told stories their bearer never wanted to share. The kind that whispered of battles fought in darkness where no one else could see. Her knuckles were raw and split, telling tales of recent violence, and her gait carried just the slightest hitch, a barely perceptible favor of her left leg that spoke of old injuries never quite healed. But despite the physical evidence of whatever hell she'd been through, Maya's posture remained unshaken. Her spine was straight as a rifle barrel, her shoulders squared with a kind of discipline that couldn't be taught in basic training. Behind her, the assembled unit of Bravo squad shifted restlessly. Some chuckled quietly at Jake's crude joke, while others watched her with the detached amusement of spectators at a blood sport, waiting to see if the new arrival would crumble under the pressure or fight back. She was new here, technically the only female soldier assigned to Bravo squad in the last 2 years, a fact that had generated considerable speculation among the ranks. No formal introduction had been made. No backstory provided. No explanation given for her sudden appearance among their tight-knit brotherhood. All anyone knew was that she'd been transferred and on what the paperwork called a special directive, military bureaucracy speak that could mean anything from disciplinary action to witness protection. The ambiguity had bred whispers that floated through the barracks like smoke, each theory more creative than the last. Some claimed she was recovering from combat injuries, pointing to the obvious physical evidence. Others insisted she was just a paper pusher trying to prove herself with real soldiers. A few suggested she was an undercover investigator. But Maya Stanley offered no clarification, no defense against the speculation, no acknowledgement of the whispered theories that followed her like shadows. How many push-ups does it take to snap a wrist, Sarge? Jake continued his assault, his lazy grin spreading wider as he warmed to his theme. Or, did you trip over your own ego again? Maybe took a tumble down the stairs at the Pentagon. The question hung in the air like poison gas, and the nervous laughter that followed had the sharp edge of pack animals testing their prey. Jake Morrison had always possessed a particular talent for finding the exact words that would cut deepest. He'd learned early that public ridicule was far more devastating than private confrontation. Maya didn't say a word in response to his taunts. She didn't flinch when the laughter rippled through the assembled soldiers. Didn't even blink when Jake's voice rose another octave to ensure maximum audience participation. Her dark eyes remained fixed on some distant point beyond the training field, as if she were seeing something the rest of them couldn't perceive. That absolute stillness, that complete lack of reaction, bothered Jake more than he would ever admit to his fellow soldiers. He'd expected anger, tears, or at least some defensive response that would validate his cruelty and provide entertainment for the crowd. None of them really knew her, and in the absence of truth, people inevitably became bold. They filled the vacuum of information with their own assumptions, their own prejudices, their own need to categorize and dismiss anything that challenged their understanding of how things should be. What they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that Maya Stanley hadn't asked to come back to active duty. She had volunteered for this assignment, not because she needed redemption or sought to prove anything to anyone, but because she carried debts that only she understood, responsibilities that weighed heavier than any physical burden she'd ever carried. From a small rise just beyond the training field's perimeter, General Victor Sterling stood watching the scene unfold with the patience of a man who had seen too much of human nature to be surprised by its cruelty. His weathered hands remained clasped behind his back, his expression as unreadable as carved stone, but his pale blue eyes missed nothing. He'd known the moment Maya stepped out of that dusty Humvee earlier that morning that this assignment wouldn't be easy for her. Maya Stanley had never sought attention or recognition, had never asked for special treatment or consideration. And yet, wherever she went, history seemed to follow like a faithful dog, impossible to shake and impossible to ignore. Still, the general didn't intervene in the ugly scene playing out below. Not yet. Sometimes the best lessons came from allowing situations to develop naturally, from letting people reveal their true character, without interference from authority. He'd learned long ago that you couldn't force respect or manufacture character. Both had to be earned through fire and proven through adversity. Maya Stanley had already proven herself in ways these young soldiers couldn't begin to imagine, but they would have to discover that truth for themselves. Mia stood in the rising heat of the Tennessee morning, silent and still as a monument, while the bruises along her neck, half-healed but still angry red at the edges, caught the strengthening sunlight. The thin scar beneath her left eye shimmered faintly, a pale line so precise it looked almost surgical, a mystery that would have solved many puzzles if anyone had bothered to ask the right questions. She didn't defend herself against Jake's verbal assault, didn't look away from whatever distant vision held her attention, because Maya Stanley knew something the rest of them had never learned in their comfortable lives. Respect earned in silence lasted longer than applause earned through noise. She looked like someone who had walked through hell and emerged carrying others on her back. And some of the assembled soldiers were already placing silent bets on whether she'd made it back intact or was still trapped in whatever nightmare had carved those marks into her flesh. But Maya's stillness wasn't the paralysis of fear or the submission of defeat. It was something deeper, something older, something that came from places where noise meant death and silence meant survival. Her shoulders remained squared despite the weight of invisible burdens. Her breathing steady despite the emotional assault. Her hands steady despite whatever memories Jake's cruelty might have triggered. The number 27 tattooed in small, precise digits on her left wrist caught the morning light for just a moment, barely visible beneath the sleeve of her tank top, but there for anyone who knew how to look. It was the kind of detail that might have explained everything if anyone had possessed the courage to ask. But courage was in short supply that morning among the soldiers of Bravo Squad. They preferred their mysteries unsolved, their assumptions unchallenged, their comfortable prejudices undisturbed by inconvenient truths. Jake Morrison's frustration grew with each passing second of Maya's silence. He'd expected to break her composure, to provoke some reaction that would justify his cruelty and entertain his audience. Instead, he found himself facing a woman who seemed as immovable as granite, as unresponsive as the desert, as dangerous as still water. Something about her absolute calm made him feel exposed, vulnerable, like he was the one being judged rather than the one doing the judging. What secret was Maya hiding behind those scars? Type scars in the comments if you think Maya's silence means she's hiding something dangerous. The next morning brought no relief from Jake Morrison's campaign of systematic humiliation. If anything, Maya's refusal to react to his initial assault had only inflamed his determination to break through her composure and find whatever weakness lay beneath that granite exterior. As the squad assembled for their morning exercises, Jake made his move with the calculated precision of a predator who had identified his prey's vulnerabilities. He carried a water bottle in his left hand, ostensibly for hydration during the upcoming session, but his real intention became clear when he deliberately stumbled near Maya's position. "Oops, clumsy me," Jake announced with theatrical regret as the contents of his bottle splashed across Maya's gear, soaking her backpack and spare uniform. "Guess I'm just as clumsy as you are, right, princess?" His voice carried that particular blend of false innocence and genuine malice that bullies had perfected throughout human history. The water darkened the fabric of her spare clothes and turned the dust on her equipment into mud, creating a mess that would take considerable time and effort to clean. Several soldiers snickered at the obvious setup, appreciating the creativity of Jake's latest torment. Maya's response was absolute silence. She didn't curse, didn't protest, didn't acknowledge anything had happened. She simply moved her damaged gear aside with methodical precision. During the exercises, Jake continued obstructing her movements while maintaining the pretense of accidental clumsiness. "Get a good angle of those battle scars, princess," Jake muttered as he pulled out his smartphone, angling it to capture Maya's struggle with the obstacle course, while his deliberate interference made every task more difficult. "This is going to make great content for social media." His phone's camera focused on her face, trying to capture any sign of frustration or anger that he could later use to humiliate her further. The other soldiers watched this technological assault with varying degrees of discomfort, some laughing along with Jake's performance, while others began to shift uneasily at the escalating cruelty. But Maya Stanley's response continued to confound her tormentor. Her eyes showed something deeper than mere patience. They reflected the controlled discipline of someone who had learned to master their emotions under far more challenging circumstances than anything Jake Morrison could devise. During the physical exercises, she moved with a precision that spoke of extensive training. Her form was flawless despite Jake's constant interference. Other soldiers began to notice that her technique was superior to their own, that she performed every movement with the kind of muscle memory that came from years of intensive practice. When the morning session ended and the soldiers dispersed for their break, Maya retreated to her small quarters in the barracks. Alone in that sparse room, she stood before the mirror mounted on the wall, her reflection showing the full extent of the damage that recent events had inflicted on her body. She raised one hand to gently touch the thin scar beneath her left eye, the precise line that seemed almost surgical in its perfection. From the small table beside her bed, she picked up a set of dog tags that bore 26 names engraved in tiny, precise lettering. Names that meant nothing to anyone else, but carried the weight of worlds for Maya Stanley. She had volunteered for this assignment, not because she needed redemption or sought to prove anything to the world, but because she owed a debt that only she could repay. Maya stood alone in her small barracks room, staring at her reflection in the mounted mirror. The bruises on her neck were still angry red at the edges, half-healed but far from forgotten. Her hand rose slowly to touch the thin scar beneath her left eye, a line so precise it looked almost surgical, like someone had drawn it with purpose rather than accident. From the table beside her bed, she picked up a set of dog tags engraved with 26 names, each one etched in tiny, perfect lettering. Those names carried more weight than anyone around her could understand. She hadn't come back to Fort Blackwater for redemption or recognition. She'd volunteered because there was unfinished business that could only be resolved through service to others. The photograph beside the dog tag showed 26 young faces, all soldiers, all smiling with the confidence of youth and purpose. They had trusted her once, followed her into battle, believed she could bring them home safely. That trust had been shattered by circumstances beyond anyone's control. But the guilt remained carved into her soul, just like the scars on her skin. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the barracks, whispered conversations were taking place, ones that might have changed everything if Maya had overheard them. Two older soldiers, veterans who had seen enough of war and its aftermath to recognize certain signs, spoke in hushed tones during their afternoon break. "Don't mess with her," Sergeant First Class Rodriguez warned his companion, his voice heavy with experience. "You heard about the Ghost Line mission? The one that went sideways 4 years ago." "The only one who made it back," Staff Sergeant Williams replied quietly. "Command said she needed special attention, something about psychological evaluations and fitness reviews. They exchanged glances that spoke volumes, shared knowledge of classified operations, of losses that couldn't be spoken aloud but never truly faded. There were rumors, too, stories passed around like legends during night shifts. Names whispered when no one else was listening. Widow 27. Jake Morrison's frustration continued to grow as his campaign of humiliation failed to produce the reaction he craved. When people don't know the truth, they become bold, he muttered to his closest allies, bitterness creeping into his voice. He tried increasingly desperate tactics to crack Maya's composure, his insults growing sharper, his interference more obvious. Nice collection of scars, he taunted during a grueling training session. Each one tell a story. Or, are you just clumsy? Maya barely reacted, just a slight tightening of her jaw, a subtle clenching of her hands behind her back. But even these small signs fueled Jake's determination to find whatever psychological button would finally break her silence. He was beginning to sense that there was more to Maya Stanley than the broken soldier he'd assumed her to be. But pride wouldn't let him back down. Instead, he doubled down on his cruelty, convinced persistence would expose her weaknesses. The mystery surrounding Maya deepened as more soldiers began to notice things they'd overlooked before. A veteran instructor avoided making eye contact, not out of disrespect, but because acknowledging her felt like opening an old wound. Others started paying attention to the way she moved, the slight unevenness in her gait that hinted at old injuries, yet contrasted sharply with the fluid precision of her combat technique. The number 27 tattooed on her wrist became harder to ignore as more eyes turned toward it. Was it just a personal choice? Or did it mean something more? But Maya offered no explanations, no clarification, no acknowledgement that she even noticed the increased scrutiny. She remained as silent and enigmatic as the day she arrived. Jake's harassment reached a fever pitch as he planned what he called the ultimate test, a public humiliation designed to shatter Maya's composed exterior once and for all. Tomorrow we find out what our war hero is really made of, he declared to his supporters, brimming with arrogant confidence. She's been hiding behind that silent act long enough. Time to see if there's anything real underneath. He spent the evening preparing, positioning phones for live streaming, recruiting soldiers to serve as an audience, already imagining the viral fame that would follow his destruction of Maya's reputation. This is going to be epic content, he bragged, finally showing everyone what happens when pretenders try to play with real soldiers. That night, Maya sat alone in her quarters, holding the photograph of the 26 soldiers who had followed her into battle and never returned. She traced each face with her fingertip, remembering names, voices, final moments that only lived now in her memory. They deserved better than what they got, she whispered to the empty room, her voice heavy with survivor's guilt, the kind that no amount of time or therapy could fully erase. The faces in the photo seemed to watch her with understanding, with forgiveness, with the quiet acceptance of those who had paid the ultimate price for causes greater than themselves. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal truths none of them were prepared to face. Jake Morrison's arrogance was about to collide headfirst with a reality that would shatter his assumptions about strength, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service. Maya's silence was about to be broken by forces beyond her control. And the revelation would change not just how she was seen by Bravo Squad, but how they saw themselves. What happened to those 26 soldiers in the photo? At BD Stories, we uncover the darkest military secrets. Type Widow if you think you know what Widow 27 really means. The morning sun climbed higher over Fort Blackwater as Jake Morrison prepared for what he confidently expected to be Maya Stanley's final humiliation. He had spent the previous evening setting up multiple smartphones, positioning his supporters strategically around the training field, and orchestrating what he believed would be a viral moment of military mockery. "Let's see if our princess can handle real military training," he announced loudly, his voice dripping with theatrical confidence. His plan was a brutal fitness challenge, a series of punishing physical exercises meant to push Maya past her limits while providing maximum entertainment for his audience. His phones were already rolling, capturing every angle of what he imagined would be her breaking point. "Come on, Sarge," he goaded with mock encouragement. "Show us what those scars taught you. Bet you've got some inspiring stories about how you earned each one." The soldiers watched with mixed expressions. Some laughed along with Jake's performance, while others began to feel uneasy with the escalating cruelty. Maya stood at the center of the chaos, like a statue carved from granite. Her posture didn't waver. She had faced worse than Jake Morrison's childish cruelty, had endured trials that would have crushed most people. His amateurish attempts at intimidation barely registered in her mind. Her dark eyes remained fixed on some distant point beyond the field, as if seeing something that existed in another time and place, something that made Jake's pathetic display seem as meaningful as a child's tantrum. Or maybe they're just from falling off your high horse, Jake sneered, his voice growing more aggressive as Maya's silence frustrated him. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just another broken soldier pretending to be tough?" He gestured mockingly at her scars, pointing at the evidence of battles fought and survived, as if they were proof of weakness instead of endurance. "These look like you lost more fights than you won, princess. Maybe it's time to admit you don't belong here with real soldiers." Then came the moment that shifted the air itself. Jake decided to use the name he didn't understand, the whispered title that had been circulating among certain military circles. "That's what some people call you, right? Widow 27. His voice carried the dismissive tone of someone who had heard the rumors but grasped none of their meaning. "Sounds made up to me, like some comic book character. What's next? You gonna tell us you're a superhero?" Laughter followed, but it was nervous now. Uncertain. For the first time since arriving at Fort Blackwater, Maya showed a crack in her composure. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the effort of containing emotions that threatened to spill over. Her jaw clenched visibly, and something flickered behind her dark eyes that made even Jake's most loyal supporters take an involuntary step back. It was the first sign that fire burned beneath that icy surface, that the silent woman they had tormented might possess depths of strength and fury they had never imagined. The atmosphere on the training field began to shift, as if a storm front were rolling in from the distant mountains. General Victor Sterling stepped forward from his observation post, his weathered combat boots crunching against the dust. Something was about to happen, and none of them were ready for it.